All right, hello. So this is a little intro to Illustrator, ramping up of Illustrator, like I do with some of the Maya classes. Um, so let's go over the very basics of it and some of the core of what I think is really valuable about Illustrator. It's somewhat of a maligned program sometimes, but it has some really good benefits to it. And to talk about it initially is that the very basic form, it's all about vectors. So anybody that's used Maya knows that it's in 3D, Illustrator's in 2D. Then we also, the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is, of course, Photoshop is bitmapped. Illustrator is all vectors. So Photoshop, you can blow things up, 20 feet big, and you'll see a whole bunch of pixelation to it. So the pixels will be very big and square. But if you blow something up in Illustrator, it's going to be, it's going to still have that same clarity. And a lot of people say that you can't do like shading or gradients or anything like that in Illustrator, which is not true. Because I have seen people do photorealistic stuff in Illustrator using mesh gradients. There's one that I'll show that has a picture of Jack Nicholson. Maybe I'll put it up on the screen. Oop, right over there. and So it's pretty amazing, some of the stuff that you can do with Illustrator. But the other thing that's really important about Illustrator is the exactitude that you can do, especially when it comes to things like logos, kind of smaller company logos, and then corporate logos or geometric. We'll talk about the philosophies going behind logos creation. But the goal that I want to make people have with their competence with Illustrator is namely competence, but also to know what to do when you're looking at that blank page, when you're staring into that great white abyss. How do you start something? And like it's said in some videos that I've seen about animation, starting a design or starting an animation without a plan is kind of like building a house without a blueprint. However, without the before the blueprint existed, it wasn't there. So somehow you have to go from all those floating ideas around in your head into putting them into some concepts, in putting them into some treatments, and then coming up with your final product. And often times for a client, if you're making something in Illustrator, it won't necessarily be the final product until they decide that it's the final product. You'll have many possible final products, and they'll be the one that determines what the final product is. So we'll start off with how to set up Illustrator. There's some more effective ways to starting it off. We'll make a new file first. So click on New File. We'll do 13 by 8. And this is creating the first artboard. So you can have multiple artboards. Here you can see one, you can create two. And we'll just keep all these at the default there. So 13 by 8 print, create, and here's our first artboard. You can zoom out with holding Alt and the scroll button. You can hold down the middle mouse button and you can pan around just like you can do with Maya and Unreal. Although you have to hold down Alt for those guys. So you don't need to actually go in and zoom like that. You can do this interactively, which is very nice. So what we should be set up with right now is the workspace of Essentials. And you'll notice that we have kind of a limited number of these tools over here. Let's go to Windows, Workspaces, and go to Essentials Classic. And you get more things, you get more tools over here, you get some other settings up here, you get this lovely little ribbon over here, and then you have properties, etc. over here. If you have used the Essentials Classic, what we can do is we can reset Essentials Classic so that it goes back to its default. Sorry if you had something customized, but it's gone now. So what I like to set up is have transparency at the top and then have the layers. So it's a little bit like Photoshop. So those of you that are used to Photoshop, this may feel a little bit more at home. So we go to Windows, we bring up transparency, and that'll show this guy up over here. And we click and hold on the word transparency, and we move it and we anchor it at the top so that just the blue line is at the top. Now we have that over there. We can then collapse that, and let's go down to layers, and we'll bring that out, and then we'll click and hold on layers, and then we'll put it over, oh no, we'll put it along with these other tabs like that. So now we have our layers down here, and we're going to use layers a lot. We're not going to keep, we're not going to be like move to back, move to back. We're going to see exactly what's going on in layers. Layers also behave a little bit differently than they do in Photoshop. You can't just click on a layer to make it active. Oftentimes you'll have to click on this little circle in order to actually make something happen to that layer. And you can create groups down here and group things together. So first off, I think of Illustrator all as everything is essentially a path. So a path is essentially like just a bunch of anchors together with lines going between them. So it's essentially like polygons with vertices and just on in the 2D space. So we look over here, we have this is our fill color and this is our stroke color. So our outlines have a stroke. You can have, if you click on this, double click on it, you can bring up a color. You can change the RGB, hue, saturation, and brightness, or CMYK. And you can also click over here on this little ribbon and you can bring up a color there. Or you can bring up these guys and get little swatches. So that's very handy. So if we click on pen, and I like to use a lot of keyboard commands, but you can also just click over here. I click P for the pen tool. Now you notice I have white and a stroke, so that's all right. We can click once, click once, click once, and you know as soon as we click like that, that everything is very edged and hard, and we still have it going around, still connected. We can close it, or we can just press escape, and then the object will be done. So if I click over here, I can go back to the end, and you can see there's a little icon with a circle, and now it's closed. So we have a stroke on here, and we have a fill color. So the fill color is white, and you'll also know that if we were to create another object, let's create another object over here. We have two objects. Now you'll notice that one is covering up the other. If we expand this in our layers, we can open it up and we can see two paths here. We can also hide these layers, hide that whole group, or we can hide one, which is that one. We can hide that one. Now, one of the important things is understanding how to select things. So we have two select tools. We have the selection tool and the direct selection tool. I think these are pretty vague names, so I often don't even say like, click the selection tool, or maybe the black arrow or the white arrow. But instead, when I'm working on something, I think V for the very beginning, which is the full object. It's kind of silly, I know, but I have different ways of thinking about IK and FK when it comes to rigging stuff that some of the students remember. So we have a full object there. We can click on that full object. So V for the very beginning and A for anchors. So these are little anchors. You can see it says anchor there. And we can click once and it's selected. And all the other ones are not selected because they're all white. And then you can move it around. So that's what it's like to be like inside of an object. So we can go back and press V for very beginning. Let's change the fill color for this one. And we can click over here to make sure that the fill color is active, and we could give it a color. So now you can see we have a fill color. And we can also, if we click on the stroke icon over here, you'll notice that the stroke comes into the foreground, meaning that we're now going to change the stroke color. So I can change the stroke color to be a light green. We can also change the width altogether, or depending on what the brush is, a variable width. But we can also change the stroke color, the stroke weight, which is making it larger. And if I click on the little stroke icon over here, I can make that bigger. So you can see that if I click on this guy, now I have the these selections up here that we can change things with. So if I click on this icon, click on this shape, I could go up here to stroke and I can increase the size of it. Notice how it's also making it larger outside and larger on the inside. We'll talk a little bit more about this and how this all works, because there's various settings for that. But you'll also see that this white has, it's not transparent, but it has, it's covering over everything. If we wanted to put the other shape over it, we simply go over into our layers, we grab it, and we move it above, and now we've changed the order of it. So that's some of the basics, and let's get into how we're going to do some paths. So one thing before we do that is we can change the opacity, and because we put transparency over the layers, once I have this guy selected, make sure that this little target over there is selected. I can go over, click on opacity, and I can bring it down, and you can see now, you can see through to this shape over here. So you can also make holes in the shape, which we'll talk about in a little bit also. There's an important thing in design too, which is something like keep it live. So I've talked about that before. It's important to keep things live, meaning you still have it there that you can go back to and can play with. One of the nice things about Illustrator too is that you can move these things off into the background and they still are there. You can't do that with Photoshop. You can also add multiple, and so you can think of this like your desk or your drafting table that you're working on. You can create multiple artboards. You can size these artboards with this little button over here. So we want to change the size of this artboard. You can just make it, we can make it look like that. We can even create another artboard if we wanted to right down here. And now you have kind of essentially two drafting tables that you can do work with. Put that down there. All right, so let's bring in a little shape. So in order to import something, you place it. You place an image into your scene. You can also drag something into your scene. If it's a JPEG, I can grab this over here, and it places it in there at kind of a predetermined size. We can change that size by going to the corner, moving it around. It's going to be able to freely distort like this. So if you want to make sure that it's the ratio is the same, you just hold down Shift. I think that you can also do the same thing with Alt, but it just thinks about the middle. But you can see it, the ratio is different. So if we do Alt and Shift, we should be able to anchor it into the middle and keep the ratio the same. This is also the same with making shapes, which we'll talk about. And shapes, to me, are essentially just a kind of a path that you have to expand. We'll talk about expanding later. Alright, so if we look in our layers, we can see that this reference image is already a layer, and it's a linked something or other, a linked file. We can turn it on and off. We can also lock it so that it's not modified. I like to keep reference layers in general above everything. So if we're creating some artwork, it's really handy to put the reference layer above, because then you don't have to worry about drawing your paths and then obfuscating what is underneath it or hiding what is underneath it. So what we can do is we can lock this guy with our reference layer on top. However, let's not lock it just yet. Let's change the opacity to be nope, that's the wrong one. You have to do right target. Let's change the opacity to be a little bit lower. So let's go down to 50, and then we can create our object underneath it. So we did that, and I clicked on this to target it. You can see a little blue square. That means that it's being active. And let's lock it. And so now we're not going to be able to click on it. So it's our reference. And also, if you change the stroke size, let's bring that back down to 1. And then let's click on our stroke color. And let's change that stroke color. We'll click on this guy up here, and we'll change it to black. And let's change our fill color, and we're going to make that invisible. All right, so anything that we create from here on should have black stroke color and be invisible. So, exactitude. There's a lot of different ways of doing exactitude in Illustrator, and there's also a lot of ways of doing things in an artistic way that's flowing, that's organic. So don't think that it's just about some kind of exactitude and corporate logos. We also have a ruler, which is very handy, which we'll talk about later. If you press Control R, you can bring up this ruler. You can bring down guides. We'll talk about guides in a bit. We also want to make sure that our smart guides are on. So if you go to View, make sure that there's a check mark over here. Very, very handy thing. So to start with, I will take a drink. Oh, that's refreshing. I'm not being paid for advertising. So I press P for our pen tool, and I click once. And now you can see we have a hard edge, or a hard line. I'm going to hold down Shift, and don't worry about it being exactly on the reference. I just want you to see how to make something as exact as possible within a certain framework. And we're going to click over here, and when you hold down Shift, you'll notice that it goes at a 45-degree angle. So click once, and you can see that these smart guides are showing where it would be if you were to go all the way down off to the left. So we're going to keep going down here, and I don't even have to have Shift on because the smart guide is telling me this is where they'd intersect. So I click once, and then I can go over here. But this time I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm waiting for that purple line. I click, I go down here, intersect, hold down Shift. You'll notice that a lot of times you'll do a movement, and then you'll hold down Shift. So Shift is not always on because that will produce a different effect. And what we want with exactitude is you can eyeball a lot of stuff, which is great, but the thing that makes exactitude and like a logo mean something is how it's perceived subconsciously. And subconsciously we can really perceive those little tiny subtle bits of exactitude, even though you might think like nobody can see that. Yeah, they really can. There's a logo for community bank across the street from me, and you can see where they were not exact, and I'm giving them a harsh looking to, which nobody notices. So we can also see that we have notice how this line has a hard edge there, and then over here we have a nice point. We can actually change that because we went into Essentials Classic. We can change that that look if we go to there it is. If we click on stroke, you can see all these little settings here. We have a cap, we can change the corners, we can change where the strokes are aligned. So we can change the caps to be rounded. You have to have this guy selected. Selected, stroke. We can round them. Now if you look down here, zoom in, you can see it's nicely rounded. Isn't that pretty? We could also go over to this and we can bring it back to it's a projecting cap, so it goes outside of the line a little bit. There's uses for that. Or we can go back to the default, which is just the butt cap, as apparently it calls it. We can, and the corners can be rounded. And you can see over here that we've now rounded these corners up there. Or we can go back to stroke and we can do a bevel joint, which I haven't ever really had a use for that, but I'm sure that there is one. And so on. Dashed strokes, useful. You can change the point of the dash. That's also very useful for infographics. But for now, we want weight 1, the cap to be the butt cap, the corner to be the miter joint. And then with align strokes, I think that's more for shapes or anything that's that has a that is what am I trying to say? That is connected, so it has an inside fill. All right, so that's the straight aligned, and now let's get into this curved segment. So we go back to our pen, and we click over here. It's aligning up there, not really important to know. However, this is important to know. So we get over here, we go to the top, and instead of just clicking once, we're going to click and hold. So by clicking and holding, what we do is we create handles. And so we create a curve, which can often be called like a Bezier curve. And we want to make it so that it looks pretty much like it's following the curve in this reference image. And you'll notice since we did that curve, now we come out of it with a curve. So we'll come down here and we'll look for our smart guide, and our smart guide says that that's where it's aligning up, and we'll click just once. We won't click and hold, we'll just click just once and we'll make a hard anchor. So there we are. So now we have a nice curve, and then I'll go over here to the top and you can see the purple line is showing the exactitude, and click and hold, drag over there and hold our shift down after we've clicked, go down here, purple line, click once, and now over here we're going to click and hold and then hold down shift, and then we'll go down here, purple line, and click, and then we'll press V to get out of that, and there's our object. So there is some eyeballing going on here, but don't worry about it. We'll get it more exact later. Now, one of the important things about making paths is that you can make a path and you can change the anchors as you're going along. So, for instance, if we go and we press P or click on that, we can click a path, click an anchor, click an anchor, click an anchor, click one. But we can go back even while we're still in the tool and we can modify these. So you'll notice that when I go over another anchor, it goes to a minus sign. When I go over another line, it goes to a plus, so we can add an anchor. Now, this is where Alt and Control and Shift come into play. If I hover over this and I hold down Control, I just get the regular selection tool. This means I can grab this and I can move it around. If I didn't have Control down, it would delete that anchor. So no Control down, add the anchor. Hold Control down, I can move it around. Now, if I hold down Alt, I get this little guy, which is often called a caret. This is how you convert it into a Bezier line. So you can either click once, and I think then you get this little guy, which can help make that rounded. But you're not going to have any anchors to it or any handles. But what we want to do, what I want to do right now, is I want to create some handles. So I click and hold, and then I pull out, and now I have two handles. And these guys I can move around. And to move these guys around while you're still on the tool, you hold down Control, you grab a handle, and you move it. And you can see how the handles are working together. So in Maya, this is like the graph editor, and call it a tangent. You can also see that I can move this side in, and I get a little bit of a hard edge going on over there. So you'll get to figure out how these guys work the more you use them. Notice also down here, as I'm doing this, that the point is changing. If I get to a certain point and it will hide that point. It'll show up and it'll go away. So you have to figure out how that all works, because if you want that, you want to make sure that all of the anchors are consistent. We can also continue with these handles, but we can break these handles or break that tangent. And to do that, we're going to hold on to Alt, and with the caret, and I click and hold on this, and then I move it down. So you can see now I have a hard edge, but I still have two handles. If I want to move these guys around, I just hold down Control and I click. So now these guys move independently. So if you want to make a nice curve and you're like, oh, this is a hard anchor, so you want to make this go around here nice and smooth, you're going to have to make these guys a nice soft Bezier curve again. And the way to do that is either to click once with Alt pressed down. Actually, that doesn't do it. Is Alt and click and hold. Then you can make it happen. And now you've got it back so that these guys are connected. So a lot of different ways of doing things on this, but that's important to know how to do so that you can change things on the fly. It's really good to do that so that you don't keep going back and clicking on this and adding. If you do get it disconnected, like I pressed escape, and you're like, oh no, how do I connect it? You'll notice that when you get to the anchor and you're in the pen tool, you'll see that little slash sign. That means continue where you left off. If for some reason you have two of these guys, oftentimes you can connect these guys together. I can click one and I can snap it to that, and I hold Control. I should be able to. Oh, these guys are not connected. Notice how it's connected to the, to the line. You can snap it right to the path. Very handy. But I want to snap it not to the path, but to the anchor. So it should show that where it's snapping to. So it's saying snapping to path and snapping to anchor. Or intersecting shows that it's intersecting the stroke. That's very important for making fancy logos. So Control, and I do a little marquee around these two joints. I should be able to right click and select join, and now it's joined those two together. Doesn't always do it, and I'm never sure why, but it's very handy to know that you can create you can join these paths together. So V for very beginning, let's delete that. Let's delete that. P, and let's do this. So click on this guy. Now this one, we're going to click and hold, and we're going to hold down Shift after that. We're going to get it to that nice curve. Now this one, you'll notice we have a curve, but this is going to be a hard-edged line. So what we can do here is we should be able to hold down Alt and click on this. And now we've gotten rid of that one handle, so now we have a nice hard edge. And we see intersect. We click once, and we still have a hard edge. We go over here, we get the purple line, we click and hold, we drag, we hold down shift, and we get this. Hold down alt, click on the anchor, down here, click once, and repeat. Shift, alt, click, click. You get the picture. Click and drag and shift, alt, click, click, click and drag and shift, click, click and drag and shift, click, click, done. All right. Pretty nice. You can see the little points down there. Everything is pretty exact. Let's try this last one. Click. Find this. Drag. Hold down shift. Let's click on this one. Since we have the curve going in the wrong way and we want to have a hard edge, let's click on this with alt down. We'll go down here, we'll find that intersection, we'll click and hold, and then we'll pull down this way. There you go. So now we have that guy going in there. We hold down alt, we click on this to make it hard, go over here, move it this way, shift, alt, click, click and hold, alt, click, etc. You'll also get to know, like, this doesn't look right, that doesn't look right. You'll get to know where you need to go with this anchor in order to get it into the right place, etc., etc. All right. So I think that lesson is pretty much learned. Let's look at some other things that we can do when it comes to doing silhouettes. All right, so let's unlock this guy. Let's move him out of the way. And let's bring in a silhouette. For this, we're going to hold down Alt and Shift so that we keep the ratio the same, and we'll zoom in on it. So here is our reference image, and we'll want to let's drag this guy up to the top. Oh, that's the wrong one. We have our linked file here. That's all right. Okay, so we have this guy. We're going to turn down the opacity. You can type in there to 50. And then let's lock it. All right, so GUR is locked. Now we click underneath it. If we're going to make a new layer. Nope, we don't want that. Click underneath it. This is where we're going to start drawing. So this way, when we start making paths, it's not going to draw on top of it. And if we had a fill color, say we had a fill color of white, it shouldn't draw on top of it, but it is at the moment, which is unusual. That's because the path that we're drawing is above our reference image. Let's put it below. There we go. All right. So let's delete that one. Click on that one as our where we're going to start. So what we have here is we can have a silhouette, but we also have holes inside of it. So you can either have a hole inside of something with something that's showing from underneath, or you can have white, which is going to cover everything. Sometimes you want to have a hole. Sometimes you feel like you're not. So let's press P, and we're underneath it. Now we're going to go around this object. You don't have to follow everything exactly. So you can do what you artistically deem is necessary. One of the important things is make Illustrator do most of the work, because when you make Illustrator do the work, then your lines will look nice, and they'll have a real nice flow. What I mean by make Illustrator do the work is you don't go like this. Doom, doom, lots of little tiny lines. You can see how it's kind of janky a little bit there. You don't want to do that. So what you want to do is you want Illustrator to do the work for you, and you can have it do the curves. So we'll start with something. Let's start right over here. Start right about over here. And I just clicked once. I'm going to go over here, and I'm click and hold. And then I'm going to have Illustrator do the nice curve. So it's okay if it's not exact, but it's a good enough approximation. Ours is probably going to be a lot more exacting than what we're looking at below it. And like we did with some of the sawtooth waves, we're going to hold down Alt, click on this, and it's a hard anchor. And we click and hold. Now if I don't like where a position of one of these anchors is, I can hold down Control and I can move it to another spot. There we go. You'll also get to know where how you want your anchors to go in terms of curves. That takes a little bit of time to figure out. But try to keep them as little as possible, so conserve your use of anchors. So here I'm going to click and hold, and I don't really like how this curve is looking. So what I can do with this is I can hold down Alt, and I can go in here and I can redo that curve over there. I can keep Alt down, I can grab onto this handle, and I can move the handle over here. And then Alt is still pressed down, and now I can adjust how this handle is going to look. So with that being said, we got out of our tool. Go back to our tool and we'll finish it up. So click on there. Now you'll notice it's a hard angle. We'll have to, oh there we go. I just held down Alt and it was fine. And then I just click and drag. Over here I hold down Alt and I move this around. That's not hard there. So I hold down Alt and I make that a harder one. Hold down Control, move that around. I'm getting these guys to look more round the way that I want them to look. Alright, so we're back to this one. I'm going to press Alt and click on there so we have a harder edge. And middle mouse button to move to pan up. Click and hold. There we go. But I don't like the angle that's coming off there. So I'm going to go back to this and make that rounded with Alt. I'm going to move this down here so I have more control over that that line. So there we go. It's looking good. Let's go over here. We'll hold down Alt and click on that. And let's go to this corner and let's pull that down like that. Alt and zoom out. And over here I'm going to click and pull, and I don't like this one, so this one I'm going to hold down Control and then I'm going to zoom that out, and we'll get a little bit of a harder line, but it's still curved. I'm just going to do the head for now, and since I'm just going to do the head, I'm going to put it down to here. Click and hold, dragging it out. And over here, click and hold and drag it down. Control, move it out. Control, move it down. And Control, click. Over here, Control, and just regular click. This one, I want this to be rounded. No, I don't want that rounded. I want it to be a hard angle. And this one, let's see if we can have Illustrator do all of this over here. So click and pull. And I don't like how that looks. And then I just pull that out. So it did that whole line over there. And that's probably okay. We'll see how it looks afterward. And now this is this line is coming all the way out, and I don't want that, but I'll click once over here and then control and pull this in. Zoom out, and I'll click and hold here and drag, and then I'm going to close it, clicking and dragging. Right, so obviously we don't like that one over there, so I'm going to hold down Alt and make it rounded, and Control over here, bring that down. Now notice how, like, I have more control over this guy, but then the other one's kind of flailing about. That way I can go over here and I can control this one a little bit easier. So if we can also flip these guys back and forth, and now you can see I have a nice silhouette of Gur like that. Obviously also our path here was over our reference, so again, let's put that behind it, and now we have it behind it and we can still see the reference. So that's the kind of the essentials of creating a silhouette and having Illustrator do all of the work. And you can see very few anchors. Now say we have these areas in here where we have a circle, we have things that we want to cut out of it. If we were to take this object, move it around, and we have other objects that are here. Sorry, make that a color. Bring that underneath our path. Obviously, the other one is covering it. So if we were to make something that was like a circle, and I'll go over here and use a shape. Let's change that color to white. We have that white color over it. And we were to select our other path, it's going to cover it up, so we don't see that that color going on over there. So let's get this ellipse, put it underneath it so it's together. Let's lock that guy for a second. You want to get this ellipse to be the right shape. All right. Let's unlock that guy. Now, what we can do with these guys is we can actually cut out the black in this area by using something called the shape builder. So if we click on the shape builder, make sure that you have both of these guys selected. We have the path and we have the ellipse. Then we click on the shape builder, we hold down Alt, and that subtracts the area from it. And now we have a hole going through that object. Now you can see, we can see straight through it. So we have actually kind of like cut a hole inside there. Shape Builder is going to be very, very, very useful in the future for creating icons or for creating various designs. And some of the fun of Shape Builder is you're like, oh, I wonder what happens if I try this. So it's pretty fun. So we could create other elements in here. We could create the other these other circles. This one. And we're just going to make our shape the way we want it to be. So it's more like Gur. Another thing that's interesting is notice how if we click over here we get like a little, looks like a little telephone kind of like icon. We can actually click on the path itself and we can move it around and it will modify the handles itself. Or we can click over here and then we can hold down Alt, Shift, and we'll move the handles both at the same time. This can be very handy for making really good geometric shapes. We don't really want that right now. So there's our shape right there. Let's move that over there. Click on black, click on white. Now we have white. Now we want to take our shape that we had created before. It's a compound path, by the way. And this is our new shape. I'm going to move this down here underneath our linked file. So we click on our compound path. We click on the new path, which is the eyeball. We do our shape builder. We hold down Alt, and we subtracted the eyeball from that. So now, if I move it around, both eyes are cut through, and we have holes in it. We can do the same thing for the rest of it if we wanted. So there is the first little lesson of Illustrator. Once you kind of master the use of paths, everything is going to get a whole lot easier, and you can help to demystify a program that is often not thoroughly understood or presumed to be for one use. Incidentally, I don't know if I had mentioned Archer. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that cartoon. A lot of it's done with Illustrator as far as I'm aware. And interestingly, Illustrator is also used in some game applications, and not just in like UI, but however you make your assets in game, if it looks good in the final product is what matters. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.